Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a registered therapist, author, and mental health advocate. With me, as always, is my co-host, Duck Maillard. How you doing, Duck?
Hey, buddy. Welcome back. We're back, season 2.
This is the first one that we've recorded. Well, no, we've kind of done a few.
Yeah, we go out of order, but this is our first episode of our new season. Going to be coming out in January, so we hope everybody at home had a good and happy and healthy holiday.
And a lot has changed since the last episode that everyone has seen.
That's true. Yeah.
How are you doing? How are you hanging in there?
Well, full disclosure, we're recording this towards the end of the year, so this is coming out after the new year. So we're still in the kind of acceptance phase of the world changing. Obviously, Donald Trump has been reelected president, which is, regardless of your politics, it's a shock to the system for a lot of people, and for us, for me personally, I'm sort of still in the kind of wallow in my own despair phase. I'd like to believe that by the time this comes out, I'm already going to be in my let's get active and make the world the place we want it to be phase. But right now, I'm still feeling a little defeated. But I'm actually, in all honesty, I'm happy to be here to talk about it and to kind of get back on the. I think there's obviously something very therapeutic about us speaking regularly about our feelings and getting those things out. And in recent weeks, we hadn't recorded any episodes. And so aside from the obvious therapy that we do, there's just the nice feeling of talking to a friend about things and kind of just hashing it out. So I'm happy to be here for that reason, if nothing else.
Well, I feel the same way. And I think that, look, this show isn't a political show.
Right.
I don't think that's going to change dramatically, even though we're in the space that we're in now. We're not going to be talking about what's going on politically week to week on the show. However, feelings are part of our show.
Feelings are real. Yeah.
And I think that, I don't think it would surprise anyone to know that we are both, liberal artist types.
Sure.
But I wouldn't say that I'm like a far left. I mean, not that I have to identify in any particular way, but I'm a relatively moderate person in general. I just have my feelings about, the state of the world and the state of our politics. But the particulars of that are almost sort of irrelevant. It's more sort of like we're all in this place in history in this moment. People on all parts of the spectrum, of the political spectrum, are having anxieties, are having fears, are having anger and resentment. And those are the types of things that I think we can delve into on this show, on this season, because we're all living in this world together. And I love having debates with people, not necessarily political debates, but just people who have different perspectives.
Sure.
I love to hear. But for us, I think that we've, in the last episode of last season, I talked about some things in my personal life that I hadn't talked about on this show before. And I think that politics is one of those like sort of third rail things where it's like, we haven't wanted to delve too deeply into it because we don't want to alienate anyone who doesn't, have the same sort of belief system as we do. And because it's not about that. Look, I can imagine us having a guest on who has a very different political background and belief system than us, and us having a therapeutic conversation about how we're relating to one another, just like in families, how you might have people that are not seeing eye to eye and have different, and you have to sit at the Thanksgiving table and figure out how to get along.
By the same token, you also have to stay true to whatever your moral compass is. I'm seeing a lot of social media posts of people being like, well, I hope we've learned the lesson that now we have to learn to understand the other side a little bit. And I'm all for that, but not at the cost of my own beliefs and my own moral. Like, if your argument is we need a new direction or we're going to try something, fine. But if you're like, yeah, I excuse or I overlook the racism and the misogyny because I think milk is going to be $1 cheaper, I don't respect that. And I don't have to be like, hey, agree to disagree. Like, that's the bullshit that I want to make sure that people understand that that's not going to fly. You know what I mean?
Well, that is the tough line that we're having to walk because, look, politics has always been divisive, and there's always been, it's always been the third rail. I mean, it's like there's a reason why in casual conversation you don't want to talk about religion, you don't want to talk about politics. It's like you can offend people very easily. It's creating more anxiety for people than I think ever, at least in American history, as far as I can remember in my lifetime. The thing that gives me a little bit of solace, because I have the same feelings as you, is just like concern for where we're at and not really being able to understand some of the mindsets where people are
Right.
willing to support certain things that are probably not even consistent with their value system.
Yeah. You would think that they would be deal breakers. That's the thing.
Yeah, yeah. The solace that I take, and this may be overly optimistic, but I'm trying to do what I can to try to stay in a place of positivity, because we have to be, we can't be part of the problem. We have to be part of the solution. Is that if you look back through history, I mean, history is littered with moments of crisis, with times when there have been despotic leaders or conflict and revolutions, or most of history was not democratic.
Right.
There's been kings and queens and dictators and warlords, and we've been relatively lucky to have the ability in our society to actually have debates, to actually have compassion for one another, and to try to find the common good. Overall, the American experiment has been a good one when you compare it to most of history. And I think that we've been through tough times before, maybe in our memory, not quite as divisive and difficult as it is right now, but time does roll on, and this too shall pass. I don't know exactly what that'll mean. I don't know how it will resolve itself, but I do think that one way or another it will resolve itself. I don't know if it'll happen in 4 years or 8 years or 12 years. I just know that we will be in a different place in that time.
That's for sure.
I don't know what that will be, but it's like, I think we have to think optimistically. The conversation that I have a lot with my clients is difficult because I have clients that are all over the spectrum in terms of their religious and cultural background, their political beliefs. And I come from, my dad is a liberal guy, moderate liberal. I mean, he was kind of at least what you'd call an old school liberal. He's definitely not of the newer generation of liberal. So I was raised that way, and that's been my belief system. Although when I was a young adult, I think I was probably a little bit more radical, kind of leaning towards
all were.
Like the idealism of youth. Like maybe we can actually like change this world to a place of.
Yeah, we learned that ain't true. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing is I think that both in the work that I do and in the realities, I hate to say that you get cynical, but I've had to learn how to kind of play it up the middle a little bit and see other people's perspective, which I think is a good thing, even if sometimes it means having to let go of some of those idealistic ways of thinking, because the most pragmatic way forward is not always the most idealistic way of thinking. And that's, I think, the way in which I've tempered. It's like, it'd be nice if we lived in a perfect world.
Sure.
But we don't, and we never have. And so that's nothing new.
Yeah.
And so every conversation that I have with someone who I don't necessarily see eye to eye with, and might say something that is like either offensive to me or just doesn't sound accurate to me. It just might sound like they're misinformed, or, they haven't really thought it through completely or gotten all the information. I still have to understand, like, they're having a human experience in the same way that I am.
That's true.
Their opinion and their feelings are valid. And sometimes your feelings, difficult feelings, can lead you to some odd places in terms of choices that you make in your life. And that's nothing new to me. I've done that in my own life as an addict. I've done that in my life. We've all made bad choices in our life. So I think it just as much as a lot of the conversations we have that have nothing to do with politics, and a lot of the conversations I have with clients start and end with compassion, self-compassion, first and foremost. I think that's the only way we can work through this, right? And if we're not part of that solution, just as a starting point, like, we're human beings having a human experience.
But, and I don't mean to contradict you, but like the thing that I want this to be the last thing we say about it, because we don't want to get too bogged down in this. Yeah. It's easy for me to say that I can just throw my hands up and go like, you know what? Fine. Fuck it. You have at it. Let's see what you do. It's easy for me as a white male this isn't going to affect me in the way it's going to affect someone who's in the LGBTQ community. Someone whose rights could potentially be severely affected. My wife, we're not going to have any more kids. So the prenatal care or abortion access isn't as much of an issue for us, but it will be for other people in my life. And so it's tough for me to say, well, you know what? I guess we'll just see how it goes, because there's still a line where I have to go. It's one thing to say macroeconomics is better than microeconomics, but it's another thing to say, I'm going to take rights away from these people. And even though it doesn't affect me, I still have to have the strength to stand up and say, no, that's not right. And I refuse to accept it. And I'm not going to agree to disagree. And so I find myself struggling with that battle of like, because I want to give up right now. I want to just be like, fine, you know what? You guys got it. Have fun. Let's see what you do with the country. But I can't give up because there's too many people whose rights are being marginalized and who are being taken away. You know what I mean?
Well, I was going to ask you, who's saying that? Who's saying, fuck it. Let's just...
Me.
Yeah.
I'm saying me. Like, there's a part of me that doesn't want to fight right now. I don't want to march. I don't want to start grassroots campaigns because I go, we just did that and we got the shit kicked out of us. I say us as if I'm not a political activist, but I'm just saying, like, the call to arms that people sometimes are already putting up is like, all right, get active, get ready. I'm like, we just did that. And that clearly wasn't what connected with the rest of the country.
Yeah.
So that's not going to work. So there's a part of me that wants to go, you know what, have at it. I'm not going to fight the useless fight and do something that's just for appearances. And I know that's not a healthy place to go from.
You got to have your emotional reaction to this right now. I think that, to be honest, when we got the news of the election, my first impulse was to kind of just distract myself completely and not even really deal with the reality of that and everything I think is going to come from that reality. I spent about a week doing that, and then I kind of got back to real life, and then it kind of started trickling into my mind what this is going to look like. And then there's been appointments that have come, and that's kind of like,
yeah, who knows where we are in January when this episode comes out.
Well, if
a lot could have changed.
If we've learned anything in this day and age, it's like, even in a week's time, like, what was the scandal last week could be a totally different, another new scandal. There is that feeling of like wanting to just brush it under the rug or throw up my hands and just be like, well, I guess there's nothing we can do, or just like, and that's not democracy, right? No. Of course, we have to stay involved, and if we believe it, but we do have to have that moment where we're allowed to have that feeling,
right?
And that's kind of what I'm talking about, the line that I want to walk in terms of how we talk about this stuff, because it's like, there may be a way in which we have to approach this politically tomorrow.
Right.
But we have to deal with how we feel today.
Right.
And I want to be a place where we can do that, because so much of what we do is yelling and screaming and overreacting or doing things that are actually not even helping, because we're not really experiencing our feelings first. And that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
So I want this to be a safe space. I don't want it to be too colored by us having this conversation, or like, we're going to leave it at that. And we're not going to get into the weeds about specific political things, but I don't want to ignore something that is a very visceral experience that everyone is having. And I want to open the door for that. So that's
which is why I felt comfortable kind of just vomiting that all out. It isn't about, I want feedback and I want you to agree with me. It's just me talking to you saying, here's all the things that I'm feeling, and the conflict of like wanting to let go, but also wanting to still fight for people whose voices aren't going to be heard. You know what I mean? So
I think that you have being all over the place in that regard and kind of having to vomit it out, as you say, that's a very valid place to be in this moment. And I think there's a lot of people feeling that way. So I appreciate you sharing it in that way. My tendency, of course, as a therapist and as maybe a control freak, is to try to like,
and as a podcast host,
is to like, I have to meet people where they're at, and I have to try to like figure out what's the middle ground here. And maybe I need to let go of that a little bit, maybe, I don't know.
No, I think you played it perfectly.
Okay.
I feel better now. So we can get back to the show. And like I said, getting started on season 2 here, which we're very excited about.
Yeah. Well, it's the first season we wrapped it up with that season finale, which I thought was great. And we're in a different place now as we enter 2025. I have high hopes for where we're going with the show. I think we have a lot of really great guests lined up already. Some of them are in the can, so we know that they're good episodes,
right?
Including today's
episode,
which is a great conversation with an old friend of yours,
That's right.
a friend of yours. Those of you who watch the show SuperStore or Mad Men or a lot of other things that our old friend Ben Feldman has been a part of. What do you want to say about Ben? How do you want to introduce him for this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason that Ben has had the success that he's had. He's a really likable, charismatic guy, but also not afraid to sort of turn the lens back on himself and see what worked and what didn't work for him in his life and his career. We've just had this conversation, so we know what we're in for. He walks a line of sort of this confident, almost braggadocious type of character, but that's a lot of the characters that he plays. In reality, he's a humble guy who takes the time to appreciate kind of the journey that he's been on. And we get into a lot of that and where that comes from. And if it wasn't always there in the beginning, things like that. So,
well, it's interesting for me because I knew him sort of peripherally. He was somebody that you went to college with. And he was in the circle of the band Former Future that
he'd come to shows a lot. And
so I saw him around and I knew him and I, hung out with him. I mean, I didn't really get into deep conversation with him. So I had, a perception of him that was maybe just based on he's an actor. Right. He's kind of like outgoing, performative kind of guy. Maybe a little cocky. I mean, I don't know. I didn't have like a strong opinion about him.
We're confident talking about this now because we definitely address it in the show. So Ben is on board. He knows what we're not throwing him under the bus here.
No, but I'm not saying anything negative about him. I didn't really know him that well. I mean, he seemed like a funny guy and obviously a talented guy. I just, maybe some stereotypes of the actor who's like, but a lot of time has passed since I last knew him at all. And we just had a conversation that is the deepest, most in-depth conversation in which he talked about, he was very self-reflective and very self-aware. So I feel grateful. You don't get these opportunities in life that often. Somebody you've known, and then all of a sudden later you get this much deeper look into what makes them tick and who they are and where they come from. You hadn't mentioned his name and I hadn't said, oh yeah, that would make a great episode. This never would have happened. Right. And so this is just one of those gifts that the show has provided.
It's happened to me. I mean, last season with my good friend Allie Larkin, like we've been friends for a long time, but that conversation, we got into things that I didn't know. And same with Otto, like we've had this opportunity to kind of, you don't have these conversations with friends, even people that you've known for a really long time where you go, wait, I'm not sure I know the story of your upbringing, or I'm not sure I know about that trauma. And I'm sorry that I wasn't a better friend to have asked about that. And so it's really a kind of a side gift of this show is getting to know the people that I thought I already knew well, just that little bit much better. Same with you. Like the conversations that you and I have had, I'm much closer to you now than we had been despite knowing each other for 20 years.
It is crazy. We've known each other for 20 years. And if we spent this much time as we are on this show, not on the show, would we have gotten into all these conversations?
Certainly not. Partially because the stereotype of men who like hang out all day. And then my wife goes, what'd you talk about? You go, oh, nothing. Like we don't typically, get into, feelings and trauma and things like that. But no, I think absolutely the show has been a nice added benefit of building stronger relationships with people I love.
What's interesting though, that reminded me of something that's been a phenomenon. I think a lot of therapists can relate to this. Since I've gone into the world of mental health, since I've become a therapist, I don't know if it's that alone or if it's just that I am also talking about these things more publicly. But I've had a lot of old friends come up to me and just start sharing things that they never did before.
Really?
Yeah. And like, just like at a dinner party or something. So somebody I've known for 20 plus years will just start dropping all this stuff about childhood trauma and all the things they've been talking about in therapy. And I'm like, whoa. And I'm wondering to myself, like, is this because I'm a therapist and they feel like a comfort level,
or are you more open and receptive to it and people are picking up on that?
It could be that. It could be that my energy is different than it was like 20 years ago. I would have just been putting up an energy of like this, I'm just talking about me now.
Right. Or the drums.
Or the drums.
Don't share.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's not always what you want. Of course, you don't want to delve into a therapy session with your friends every time you see them. I think it's also probably partly that when you're in your 20s, nobody has that much
introspection. Yeah.
Introspection or willingness to be vulnerable because you're still holding up that sort of artificial, that facade of like, oh yeah, I'm cool.
But you also said that at least initially when you started studying to become a therapist, that you had a tendency to immediately start kind of like not diagnosing people, but categorizing. We're like, oh, that guy, I can see borderline personality in that guy. And that's like a Psych 101
Yes,
thing.
everyone who goes to grad school to become a therapist or a psychologist does that. That's just, once you start learning about assessment and diagnosis, you start diagnosing everyone in your family and all of your friends. And they love it, by the way.
Do we have enough time for you to tell me what you would diagnose me with?
Oh, man. Well, first of all, I probably legally and ethically shouldn't do that because you're not my client.
All right, we'll do it off the air and you can tell me.
That's a difficult thing. It's easy for the armchair psychologist to watch TV and see the people who are, not to go back to the political conversation, but you have your conclusions you come to based upon what you see on TV of how people talk, the things they talk about, the way they talk about it. As a therapist, I can't really do that because I have expertise. And I see something and I'm like, oh, that fits all the criteria for this personality disorder. Yeah. But if I were to say that, especially on film,
right,
I could lose my license.
Sure. Well, then I'll say it. No. I do remember when I was in therapy, generalized anxiety disorder was the catch-all kind of phrase of like, you're just a generally anxious person.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It wasn't any specific thing. You know, I wasn't hearing voices or anything like that. But
you're not a sociopath.
Okay. Yes. Well, let's get on with the interview then, 'cause now I feel healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, but I was just wondering, if it is something that just happens, have you noticed, like people when they get into their 40s, when they enter middle age, if the conversations with people you've had that you've known for a long time and that have been in your life for a long time do tend to evolve and go to places that are a little deeper,
right,
and more vulnerable than they were when you were?
I would say yes, but again, I don't know if that's due to me being more, like just even saying goodbye to Ben right there, just I wanted him to know how much it meant to me that he came to do this for me. Whereas 20 years ago, I was later, dude, so it could be a side effect of me putting that out and then them reflecting it back on me, being like, I really love you and I really appreciate you. And maybe I hadn't said that in the past, and just being more effusive with sharing my feelings with those people. So I don't know. I don't know if it's a cause and effect type of thing, or if it is just we all get a little more open, a little sappier in our older age. You know what I mean?
Well, I do look at it like there are certain things that ideally we accomplish at each phase of our life, and that has to do with growth, right? And hopefully we're growing and maturing emotionally as much as we are anything else, but that's not true for everyone.
Yeah.
So if you do find people in your life or in yourself that you're more gracious, that you have more gratitude for the people in your life and you want to express it to people, and you don't want to miss opportunities to share something more meaningful, something deeper, make a connection that's more meaningful. I think that reflects that, right?
Yeah.
Like hopefully you're in a place where you've grown to be able to do that. You didn't have access to that or even the impulse or motivation to do that when you were younger. So I always love that when I run into someone, or even if it's somebody I've still been seeing for a long time, and then I notice like, that's a new side of them.
Yeah.
Like they're really opening up there.
I love the way it makes me feel to have that new facet of a relationship opened up. I love the way even someone like Ben, who I hadn't seen in a long time, just I look at somebody that I have this long history with, and I go, I see you in a different way. I appreciate you, and maybe it was my fault for not seeing that earlier or not verbalizing it earlier, but I'm going to take that opportunity now. I'll take that opportunity now. All my friends and family who are watching, I love you and I miss you, and give me a call and we'll hang out. That's all I'm going to say.
Well, that's a lovely sentiment to end our intro on.
It's true.
So we'll jump right into our conversation now with Ben Feldman, the fabulous actor. He's done some directing and producing, multi-talented, very charismatic, funny, and interesting guy. We had a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it on the season premiere, season 2 of the Harder to Breathe podcast. Tune in. Well, I guess I do an outro. I don't need to tell people to tune in.
Don't tune in. Don't watch. No, but you can still tune in every Tuesday to new episodes, but stick around for this one right now.
How about the email address?
The email address. It hasn't changed from season 1 to season 2, hardertobreathepodcast@gmail.com. Drop us a line. Tell us about your holidays. Tell us about how you're feeling about this state of the world right now. And, maybe we'll have a conversation. We'll open a dialogue about it and make you feel better.
I feel like I'm like a little off my game. Like I can't remember what we're supposed to do in the intro, what we're supposed to do in the outro.
Well, we got new theme music. No, it's all right. It's the same old show. We're just getting a little bit better each and every episode.
Yeah. So. All right. So without any further ado, here's our conversation with actor Ben Feldman right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Ben Feldman, welcome to the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Thanks for having me. What a cool spot this is. I like doing things in person.
So much.
Yeah.
So much us, me too.
That's why you're really good at
I've been doing this for
words.
A while.
Yeah.
We find that the in-person ones are have a much more organic flow, and
The Zoom thing, and everything is now Zoom. I mean, acting is Zoom, auditions are Zoom, chemistry reads are Zoom. It kills me.
Yeah.
You know, the last time that I think that I was in a room with you was at Duck's wedding.
Oh my gosh.
That's how long it's been
Jesus.
since you
How
and I
long
have
ago
been.
was that?
That was 12 years ago.
Wow, 12 years. That's so right. Was that 2013?
2012.
2012. Okay, man, that's a long time.
Yeah.
How old? What you?
I'm old.
30 kids
I'm
now.
63. And I feel it every day.
That's you've just alienated every 63-year-old.
No, you
I'm
something
old.
to
I
aspire
am
to.
decrepit.
Yeah.
So since then,
Yeah.
you've had a hit sitcom. You've gotten married.
A
and
hit
had-
com.
A hit
A hit
com.
con. Yeah.
You've had 2 kids.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of other things in your life have evolved and changed in that time. We've elected Donald Trump president twice.
Yeah,
so
man.
many things have changed.
Look at us.
Look at us. We're doing it,
Us
America.
go. We are really we hit the jackpot with.
The Ben Feldman that I knew in 2012 or whatever it was, is he a different person today? Or
Oh yeah, I don't even remember. I feel like Sarah Bareilles said this on your podcast, but I have no memory of anything. I don't even remember last week. I certainly don't remember anything beyond like 5 years ago. Maybe even pre-kids.
Yeah.
That seems like a different world altogether for me. But yeah, back then and my 20s before that, I mean, it's a blur. It feels like when you wake up and you're like, oh, I had such a vivid dream, but then you try and remember the details and you just remember like colors and shapes. That's kind of what my 20s and most of my 30s are to me.
I also call it LA time. Like, you know, I lived in New York for 6 or 7 years after college, like you did. And I remember those 6 years like it was a lifetime.
Yeah.
But 20 years in LA is like, it's one long summer day.
Is that why you think it's seasonal? It's the seasons?
Probably, but it's also the ease of living. I'm not carrying
Yeah.
groceries up in a cart, up a
Yeah.
4-flight walk up.
Things are more memorable.
Yeah.
there. I remember I lived in New York for a year and I remember most of that
Yeah.
way more than a year later when I was in LA.
Well, you guys have known each other since college, right?
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm curious, Doc, what did you think of this guy when you first met him?
Well,
I won't fault you for any
No,
of
no,
it.
no.
I'm not good at first impressions. Certainly not in my
you were a freshman when I was a senior.
Yeah.
And I think I remember my first instinct or my first impression was like, why is this guy so confident? Like you came in with a I was
Zero reason to be.
Well, I was talking to Ryan and I. Any freshman in an acting school just left being the biggest fish in the smallest pond. So we all come in with that vibe, and I think it probably spoke to my insecurities. I'm like, who does this kid think he is? I've been here for 3 years.
Was it also because I was a BA like you? And
then you became a BFA?
Well, no, but even before I became a BFA, to walk in and think that I was the shit, being having a Bachelor of Arts, surrounded by all these BFAs who were kind of like the elite.
Which is so funny now that we actually hung
So
on
stupid.
on
I hold
protocol
on to it all
there.
the time.
But yeah, no, but I do remember thinking that, like thinking this kid's too confident.
Yeah.
And then,
I was.
not to skip way ahead, but like the more successful and the more famous you got, the more down to earth and chill I felt you were.
I think
so.
that's
Maybe I
accurate.
either misjudged you in the beginning, or you did kind of have a little bit of like humbling, or like,
1,000%.
it isn't as easy as I thought it would be.
No, I think that trajectory is fully accurate. I think I'm lucky that I had that undeserved confidence young, because what we do is such a insane thing to choose to do that if you go in
needs
insecure,
confidence. Yeah.
you need to be have blind faith in yourself based on absolutely nothing, which is what I had.
So where did that come from? Because you did theater, you liked the theater camp, right?
Yeah. No, I didn't even do theater camp.
Oh,
You know
you
what I did? I went to a sports camp, but I was the kid who did all the theater at the sports camp. Like I did all the plays, and even in high school, I was kind of
Wait, there were plays at sports camp?
yeah, man. Yeah, I did.
Was it Damn Yankees every year?
Greater Tuna, Little Shop, a bunch of. It was strange, we're still Jews, so we were kind of creative and funny.
Gotcha. Jewish sports camp.
Jewish sports camp, yeah. It was easy to get ahead there.
There's Hank Greenberg on every wall.
Sandy Koufax.
Sandy Koufax.
Exactly. But we, I think I had good parents who believed in me to a degree. I mean, I don't know. I listen, parents, that's a whole other, I'm sure it's this podcast
Yes,
too,
it
but
is.
I could do about 17 podcasts there. But I don't know. For some reason, I just had this blind confidence. And I was in high school, I was my friends were all the popular jocks, and I was their like theater friend that kind of rounded them out and made their group look diverse.
Yeah.
And then when I was with the theater kids, I was like the popular kid who's lucky he got the part in the play. So I was kind of both of those things, and I was the outsider in both. And for whatever reason, I guess that puts a spotlight on you that can breed confidence in a weird way.
I can relate to that a bit because when I was in college, I was, I had the band, which was the Hollywood scene, right? And my friends in that world, which I never felt like I fully fit into because I was kind of more of a preppy jock compared to the hipsters in Hollywood and Los Feliz and Silver Lake.
Yeah.
But then in the UCLA world, I was this artist. I was the Hollywood type. They all thought that I was like kind of pretentious and kind of like metrosexual. And so like I didn't really fully fit in there.
I used to say that all the time.
Oh, sure did.
So yeah, that's interesting. So wait, I'm confused. This confidence was like genuine, real confidence? Because as a therapist.
Oh, no, I don't think anything is genuine. Right? No, I think everything is based on insecurity. And I think if you really want to get into it, which I know that's what we do. I guess everybody, it's such a boring thing to say you're severely insecure because I don't know anybody have you ever had anybody on this podcast who's like, I just truly believe in myself in a genuine, earnest way.
We've had a couple of those.
Really?
Well, usually they're like coaches who are trying to like sell a program of you too can be confident in 6 easy steps.
I've never met these people. So I think a lot of it is insecurity. And I think, look, my parents got divorced when I was young. Jesus, already with this bullshit.
Bring it.
My parents got divorced when I was really young.
We'll get the tissues close.
My dog died. Yeah. My parents got divorced when I was young, and there was a lot of drama and a combination of they were both very funny and in their own ways performative people. And then at the same time, very dramatic people who had a lot of drama going on. And so I was oftentimes the adult in the room, especially with my mom, who is easier to talk about because she's gone and I can say mean things where if I said something about my dad, this exists in a world that he does too.
Gotcha.
But my mom she was like an alcoholic and was always breaking down and there was just always kind of a mess. And so I was sort of the stable one. And I was the one who's saying, it's not that bad. Look, I'm going to dance. Look how funny this is. And I was like entertaining. Okay. And so it was
jangle the keys. Look over here.
Yeah, it was a lot of that. Yeah. It was a lot of that. And it was a coping mechanism. It was a fear of going to a dark place because I know she was really ready to be in a dark place. And so I was always pulling her out of that, but pulling me out of it as well. And then, I guess that sort of, and then because of that, it taught me to sort of be performative or funny or whatever it is, which then is how I navigated social circles in my own life with my peers. I remember a long time ago, there was this guy, this really, really scary guy. I'm not going to say his name, but he was in my elementary, high school, all the way. This is not a guy you would ever mess with. And I remember there was one day where he was like, man, Ben, if you weren't funny, I would beat the shit out of you. Like, you're so lucky. You're funny because me and my friends would kill you. And that stuck with me for a long time. Like, I was like, that's sort of my way of getting out of, I wasn't big. I wasn't an athlete. So that was my in.
Interesting. So is that you started acting when you were like 6 years old? Yeah,
I mean, acting not professionally. I the way we all did. I was in plays like as a little kid. I just didn't grow up. But yeah, I did it. It started in a summer camp that was a sports camp. Different than the ones we were just talking about. There was just there was a counselor who was just like, you're loud and obnoxious. You should be in Annie. I'm directing it. And that was the first time. And then I kept doing plays and I did it in high school. And then I went to school for it. So yeah, I always want to be an artist because I'm not smart enough to do other things and lazy. And so that's the only thing that comes naturally and energetically to me is so I wanted to be a painter or a singer, which that went away fast. And then ultimately an actor.
Wow. And so you had this confidence pretty early on. You were doing this and obviously having success. It got you into college on this program. And was there a moment when you had like a humbling when you realized?
Oh God, constantly. And now all the time. But yeah, I think if I sort of zoomed out on the trajectory of my career, when I was a senior at our school in Ithaca, I auditioned. I got an agent through our showcase. I was like one of the only ones who got one. So I suddenly was represented in New York. Then I was going out on these auditions. I got a job while I was still at school. I was being flown to New York to audition for a Broadway show. And like skipping my buddy Billy was my understudy. And I was I kept going to New York and horrified that he was back in Ithaca doing a better job than me in rehearsals. And then ultimately I didn't get that. But I was like a hot shot for even going to Broadway and auditioning on a Broadway stage. And then as soon as I graduated, like I worked one day at a restaurant in New York, and then the understudy left that show and they called me and said, we'd like you to join and play these small parts and be the understudy, like right away in New York. So I worked one day at a restaurant. So all of this is just breeding the cockiest asshole in the world. And then I came here, and immediately after that, I got a pilot. Like the day that show closed, that night I flew to LA and booked a pilot here, which then got picked up.
I take it back. I hate you.
It's so obnoxious.
So tired of this conversation.
Exactly. But then, but anyway, if you zoomed out, a bunch of stuff like that happened. And then I didn't work for a long time, or I think there was a moment where people who repped me thought I was on the trajectory to be a pretty well-known name. It just looked like there was the seeds of it. And then I wasn't, and I was on like a Lifetime show for a while, and I didn't really do anything interesting. And I was always a working actor. Like I'm very, very lucky, but I wasn't an important one, which I think I thought I was going to be at one point. And that sort of took me down. And then, life things took me down, and I was sort of a lot of insecurities. I was a cocky kind of idiot in my 20s. And I still lay awake at night thinking about conversations that I had with people in that era in my life and how they were actually seeing me at the time. I also I liked to do things that kept me away from being sober. And so I think socially and vibe wise, I was a dick for a long time and then reckoned with that. And my life has always sort of been, this feels so narcissistic. Like even now, I feel like such a narcissist.
This is why you're here.
Yeah,
it's
I
okay.
hate it
You can
so
let it all
much.
out.
I hate it.
Well, we're going to tear you apart after you're done.
Good.
This
Yeah.
monologue,
I
so.
hope the intro is really, really bad.
Wait till you see this.
I think my entire life is constantly, even going back to school and then my career has been a constant sort of waves, a roller coaster of I'm going to be awesome. Everybody loves me. Nope. Everybody hates me. And then back to I'm going to be awesome. Everybody loves me. Nope. Everybody hates me. I can't get a job. I'm never going to work. Now I'm going to work all the time. And it's just that over and over and over again. And it sort of teaches you to not believe anything external and to look inward, I suppose.
Well, that's called being an actor anyway.
Yeah,
you know what
I
mean?
learned that eventually.
The ebbs and flows.
Yeah. But in a real, it's been pretty dramatic. Like, and I just am not, I'm not a dick about it anymore like I used to be. I think I used to think everything that was great I deserved. And now I think it's sort of this, when something great happens, I'm grateful rather than like, obviously.
Right.
I
mean, typically, I don't want to go through your resume piece by piece.
Please don't.
But I want to an extent that I want to kind of touch on those important moments when there are ups and downs. So I want to start with that first job in New York. You were understudying Jason Biggs in The Graduate, starring Kathleen Turner and Alicia Silverstone.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, I would imagine that was cool. Talk a little bit about, and again, if you had any other, because first of all, the self-awareness and the perspective that you have now to say, I was a dick, I was a cocky, like I do that too. Ryan and I were just talking about it. Like the conversations I used to have with people would be like, you don't know how we do things in theater, but let me help you. That was me thinking I was being helpful, but I was just showing off, So just the fact that you are cognizant of that means that you're not what you thought you were. You know what I mean? But you step from a college experience to you're on stage understudying up and coming star, Jason Biggs, who was on the trajectory that you probably thought yourself.
Saw myself to be,
with Kathleen Turner, a Hollywood legend. Were there moments of what the hell am I doing here? Or was it immediately like, yep, like I said, this is what I knew was going to happen, and that confidence carried on, or was it humbling?
It speaks exactly to all of these different, these trajectories that I was just talking about and these ebbs and flows. I came into that thinking I'm hot shit. Of course, I'm the chosen one.
Sure.
I had a great time. It was an incredible job. It was my favorite, like 8 times a week, taking a subway to Midtown and doing a play with these people. But in retrospect, there's minor things like it was my first time around famous people, so I didn't know how to talk to them and I was a weirdo. But on a bigger level, here's what happened. I was in this show. I was such a big deal to myself. And then, and there's these things for those listening who don't know a lot about theater or Broadway or whatever. There's these understudy rehearsals. I was an understudy to Jason, but I was also playing a bunch of small parts, and I could just coast on that all the time. And we would do understudy rehearsals every week or whatever,
Keep it fresh,
just to keep it fresh and make sure that we know what we're doing. And there was one particular understudy rehearsal where the general manager of the show, there were more people in the house than normal. And they were all watching us. And at this point, I never thought I was going to go on. Jason never got sick. Even when he was sick, he performed. I was just like, I don't need to. So I was just coasting. I hadn't looked at my lines in a long time. I wasn't really thinking. And I went up, called line 1,000 times on that. I screwed up that rehearsal so much. I didn't think much of it. And then I was at Ithaca talking to the students, the prodigal son returns. You're welcome, everyone. Right. I'm here to speak of my experience on Broadway. And while I was there, chain smoking with the head of the theater department at the time outside, I was like, "Oh, sorry, I gotta answer this phone call. It's Broadway.
From the coast.
It's Broadway." Yeah. And they were calling to tell me that after that rehearsal, the Elaine understudy, Alicia's understudy, will be taking over when Alicia leaves, and I will not be. They've found somebody else to take over the other part, essentially saying that was your audition and you blew it. And I'm in it at Ithaca to talk about how great I am, and finding out this, they're like, you're still the understudy, but you're not going to be the lead in this Broadway show. And that was the first time, that was my first it took me down a lot. And to this day, I'm the most obnoxious now on a set. I'm 30 minutes early. By the way, I was going to be 30 minutes early today, but there was suddenly all of the traffic.
I mean, it's LA. It's, you never expect traffic.
No,
here.
By the way, and I even say that angrily to people whenever they're like, who knew there'd be traffic? But I did all the research on my phone and was following traffic patterns. This is not for now. Yeah. I'm always the first person on the set. I'm always memorized. I'm livid when someone is underprepared and is not taking whatever the project is incredibly seriously. And I think that all stems, I have a work ethic that all stems from that moment where I thought I was awesome and was just coasting. And then this kid, this NYU, this kid hadn't even graduated NYU. And that's who they brought in to take over for Jason when he left. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'd say that helps.
And there's been a million of those in my career, I think. But that was one that's lasted forever.
By the way, you mentioned I sound like such a narcissist. As a therapist, I can tell you, if you even say that, it means that you're not a narcissist.
I don't know. I truly believe that I both feel that I'm a narcissist, I'm conscious of it, trying to fight against it, and yet very much am.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or maybe I'm a recovered as a therapist. Can you be a recovered narcissist?
You can, but it's very unlikely. It's not very common.
You're special, Ben. You're the one who pulled it off.
That's what I'm saying is I don't think I'm recovered. You're confirming that I am. Because I know you cannot argue. I know I was at least a narcissist for the first, let's say, 30 years of my life. So there's absolutely no way that I'm not now. But I'm aware of it, and I hear myself talking and other people in the room with me talking less. And I know that's the construct of the podcast, but my brain still is fighting. Even now I'm judging. I'm like,
stop talking.
Yeah, it's like, oh my God, you're still talking about not talking.
No, this is a safe space.
No,
this is what you're here for.
Nothing is safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've had clients that are narcissists. I've known people in my life that are narcissists. They don't have enough self-awareness to have that inner monologue.
Can you not be a self-aware narcissist?
It's the two don't really go hand in hand very often.
That's interesting.
Because look, we all have narcissistic traits.
Yeah.
We're all capable of being selfish at times, self-absorbed. And it comes out in different ways. Sometimes we do it by being a saint, by doing everything for other people, by people pleasing. That's still trying to get our needs met because we're caring about
he's so generous with his time. And then, me, shucks.
So there is no such thing as someone who's altruistic then? There's really
that's that age-old question. No, I think that there is. It just depends on where it comes from. But we're all compensating for some insecurity. Yes. I think we have some deep
Except
down...
for the coaches that come on.
Right.
Yeah.
No, they're 100%.
Yeah.
They've gone clear.
So you mentioned sobriety. Are you sober?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
Right now?
Right now, I am not sober.
That's why it took him so long to get here.
Yeah. Well, I took a rickshaw here. No, I am not sober. I have many very dear friends who are. There have been parts of my life where you could argue that guy should maybe be sober. I am the guy who is best friends with the people who are sort of at rock bottom, but I leave at midnight, and then there are other friends that show up at 1 a.m. and go until 5. I'm not that category, but I'm certainly not the category that goes home at night. Well, now I am because I have kids. Yeah. But like me as a person, I push it, but I've never had a problem with it. I can stop. I don't think about it. I don't need it. My mom was very much an alcoholic.
Mhm.
In fact, in that play, in The Graduate, there was an understudy rehearsal and nobody's invited to those. And my mom was in town. She lived in France and they invited her to an understudy rehearsal. She was going to see her son be the lead in a Broadway show and she was going to have the house to herself. And we started the show and she wasn't there yet. And I was, 23. So I was just like, she'll be here soon. And I was heavily optimistic and a cocky asshole. And I remember now in retrospect, I can see it, the looks on their faces, this sort of like pity where they're like, she's not here yet, buddy. I'm sure she's going to come. Right. And like, she wasn't there after act one. And I'm like, she's definitely coming. And I saw the looks get sadder and sadder. And then she just never showed up. And then that night I went out with my I went out with Becca and Mo. From It's Funny Just to Duck, sorry
Shout
everybody. To and maybe Joe Tab, I don't remember, but to go look for my mom that night and found her in a nightgown, just completely confused and drunk in the middle of the night at her friend's apartment. She was actually supposed to get on a plane the next morning. She didn't know, like she had just gotten wasted and forgot to show up to see her son be the lead in a Broadway show. And the next morning we did this sort of intervention with her like her boyfriend at the time and some other people, and she never drank again. That was the last time my mom, at least to my knowledge.
Wow.
And she lived in the south of France, which that is quite a feat to drink in Provence. But yeah, so I've been around alcoholism and people with addiction issues forever, but not me.
Well, that's not how I was expecting that story to go.
Yeah.
That's interesting because it sounded like something really tragic that would be a deep trauma that you still hold. And then it turned into this blessing where it was the source of her recovery.
Yeah, if I couldn't end that story with, and she never drank again, I think it would be something that haunted everything that I did.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of other stuff my mom did that haunts me constantly, but that was a very sad moment that produced something great, I think.
It also produced what I would hope would be an amazing memory and feeling of community from your friends being willing to do that with you.
I think about that all the time. And again, something I took for granted. I mean, I took all of that for granted. I didn't even fully, and I'm sure a lot of it was just coping mechanisms, but I wasn't really dialed into how dark this is that my mother was when I think back to those memories and I picture Kathleen Turner's understudy looking at me and going, is she coming? Like at the time I was just like, yeah, buddy, she's coming. Chill. Now I can see the sympathy she had in her eyes when she was asking me.
Well, if you were working with a 23-year-old whose mother was not showing you, you had the paternal instinct now as a parent to be like, oh, this poor kid.
Yes, exactly. It's such a crazy thing to think back on.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was there was a lot of crazy moments growing up with an alcohol, and I was performative all the time. She was drunk or sad. I remember I had a birthday when I was a little kid. I was obsessed with, because I'm an aristocrat, steak and lobster. And
come to Ben's 7th birthday party. Steak and lobster will be provided.
The martinis will be dirty. I remember my mom was cooking it for me, and she was in the process of a divorce from my my stepdad at the time. But that's a whole other story. It was like a construction worker, racist stripper. But
in that order?
I think racist was number one.
Gotcha. Usually is.
Racist, then blowing up things. He had he drove a Bronco and his license plate said boom. And his stripper name was Master Blaster.
Oh my God.
Which now makes more sense in retrospect too.
It's a double entendre.
Yeah,
he was smarter than you give him credit for.
Really funny. But I remember her cooking me dinner, and then I just remember sitting, wondering where it was. And then I went to the kitchen, and my mom was just crying in the kitchen, and my lobster and steak were in the trash can, and she didn't know why they were there. Like I had a weird. It's funny to me because I didn't, and I'm happy now, and I think I'm a much better parent for so many of these reasons. But it's funny to me when I think back on how dramatic some of these moments were, and I think as an actor, and I wonder if you're like this too. I always used to think like, I wish there was more trauma in my life that I could access. Like I'm such a happy person, and maybe that's why I'm not a better actor. But the older I get and the more thinking back I did and the more I went to therapy, I realized there was so much trauma.
There was plenty.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say there's no correlation between amount of trauma and success as an actor, as I will tell you.
That's true.
But I wanted to ask you this, side note, my father was an alcoholic as well, but I didn't know he was drunk because he wasn't a slurring falling down. He was an angry drunk.
Right.
Were you aware as a kid that your mom was
I'm
drunk?
like you.
Yeah.
I mean, It's twofold. It's like, I don't know if it was that I wasn't aware that she was drunk or if I just assumed that's what parents are.
Do, yeah.
It never really, there's only one memory I have where it ever got in the way other than that. And even then I was with the graduate thing, the Broadway thing, I was still surprised to learn that she had a major drinking problem at that time. And I was 23. There was one time when I was like a teenager and I remember being in a car with her driving home from something. I wasn't old enough to drive. And I remember her veering almost into a tunnel, actually, the like pole that holds a tunnel up on the highway, and me reaching over and being like, Mom, and turning the wheel back and keeping the car going. And again, it's something that didn't really land.
You probably thought it was cool as a kid. You're like, I saved the day.
Their lives. Yeah, exactly. And then, but I didn't give it any kind of weight as a memory, yet I barely have any memories from when I was younger. So maybe we should get a couple more therapists in here.
Let's bring them in.
Should we have 6
Dr.
more?
Phil, come on out.
But but the fact that I even remember that and so vividly, it must have landed a little harder for me subconsciously.
Yeah.
It's funny. That when I first started therapy, I said to him, he was asking me about when I was a kid, and I was like, well, I mean, you know how like none of us remember anything at all from before we were 8, right? And he was like, no, Ben, that's not, we all have memories from when we were kids. That's just you. You
Red
blocked
flag
everything
number 1.
out.
Yeah. I have memories, but my wife always jokes that like all my memories are like, so I remember when my dad left, and like all my memories are just sad. And she's
saddest.
like, we had Christmas, like we had nice memories. So I have memories, but they're not.
Yeah,
they're not.
I remember the fights, the screaming,
Exactly.
and the trashed lobster.
Yep.
Now, the glaring difference, though, between your stories, Duck, you've talked about how you never got to see your dad in recovery.
Right.
He never made it there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And-
He was always sort of like, I'm going to, he would manage it. It was like he could get it under control, but he never completely stopped.
So he admitted that there was a problem, though?
He admitted there was a problem in so much as it was what he knew we wanted to hear.
Okay.
So he would say it like, I'm going to go to AA.
Right.
And then he'd say he'd stopped drinking. And I've told this story where I came home from, I think it was from college, and he was living in my parents were divorced too, but my mom let him live. And it was, you want to talk about some
God.
fucked up stories.
Was he in the basement or something?
He was in, a guest room or something. But I found a bag of plastic vodka bottles down in the basement that he had hid, and I made a Christmas tree out of them with a screw gun and left them on the table for him. So
That's
like
incredible.
But so yeah, for me it was like he never committed to it. He just committed enough to make us believe maybe this time it's real,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But is there a
Gaslighting.
Well, I
narcissist.
was just curious for you to have those memories from your childhood and then have memories of your mom sober.
Mhm.
How did that affect the impact of those early memories? I mean, did how long was she sober and alive in your life?
So let's see. I was 23-ish when she got sober, and she died about, I don't know, maybe 4-ish years ago. So it was a long time.
Mhm.
She didn't change. She was what I got from my mom. She was never distant. She was sad and I had to take care of her, but she wasn't distant. I always felt she was very much there, and she was a big part of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
She's creative. She's funny. So I had all of that. And then she lived in the south of France for the majority of all of my adult life. So I didn't have like a day-to-day with her. I would think I was too young to take in what was wrong with her due to her addiction to be able to compare it to what I had with her when she was sober, if that makes sense.
Was the fact that she was sober healing in and of itself in anywhere, or was it essentially just
For her and I, or for her?
For
When
you.
you say healing.
For you.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, she still remained emotional and kind of nuts just as much as she was when she was drunk, when she was sober, I think. So I think I was very much a parent even when she was sober.
Yeah.
Now, did that sort of caretaking tendency that you had in your dynamic with her, did that extend to other relationships? Is that a role that you play elsewhere?
Yeah. Yes. I think I have a lot of friends, and this may connect to why I was saying I have so many friends that are recovered addicts.
Right. You collect
But
them like broken
do,
toys.
I collect a lot of broken toys.
Okay.
There's just something attractive to me to them. Whether it's someone who has a problem or someone who seems so misunderstood that I feel like I'm the only one who can crack the code. Like there's, if everyone's like, that person's an asshole, I'm like, actually, no, you're wrong. I can tame this animal and we're friends. You just don't get it. So I think I got a lot of that from my parents. Like in relationships, I always found myself seeking out all of the strongest traits of my mom in relationships, girlfriends, the ones that have ever mattered, and my wife. They're always the strong, independent, funny, creative, all the things that I looked up to about my mom. And they've never been, this is the first time I'm actually noticing this and saying it out loud, but none of them, all my friends seem to have all of the problems that my parents maybe had, but all my relationships have been just the strongest points of my parents.
So maybe in your friendships, you were looking for an opportunity to try to fix what was broken in your family life, but then in your relationships, you're looking for someone that can take care of you.
Yeah. I think I want to keep, I suppose that. I mean, it's or maybe it's just I don't want to fuck my friends.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, we're done here. I think your therapy sessions are...
That's the only soundbite you have on your little Instagram thing.
Well, Ben Feldman doesn't want to fuck his friends. I want to ask a question that may be a bit of a stretch, so you can shoot it down and we can, you went directly from The Graduate, featuring this strong female character, kind of a dominant mother figure, to Fran Drescher.
Not a stretch, that's true.
But my question is, do you think that your history with either a strong mother or the lack of that made you attractive to a casting person who saw your relationship to an older woman and be like, there's something there, there's a dynamic there that we're looking for?
Great question. Also something I've never thought about, and it all kind of, that makes it, because I take that question and I would raise it that it's not just strong older woman. I often am playing the love interest, like I was on SuperStore for 6 years, and America.
We're not to that yet.
Okay, we'll get there. But like America would be considered a very strong. There's elements.
She's
there.
not a damsel in distress.
She certainly is not
at all.
And I've played the love interest a lot to those types as well, where I'm more of the like whiny baby, and the girlfriend or the wife or whatever is the strong one. And yes, that, I mean, I guess to a degree, Fran Drescher
too in Mad Men.
Yeah. I mean, and that wasn't a relationship, but I was also in love with her, and exactly. So I think that happens. That does happen a lot.
You might give off a vibe of like, please take care of me.
Yeah, I think so. I think I literally did a table read for a friend's show the other night. He's like, this part is so you, and it's exactly that. Like, it was me being this kind of whiny. And the girl, everyone afterwards, after the table read, were like, God, you guys had such a great dynamic, you and her. And I was like, yeah, I'm used to this dynamic. It's the story of my life.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that you and I didn't become better friends at the time that we were in the same circle, because I was a broken toy at that point in my life. Yeah. And I think the kind of person you described as people you would have been friends with, I fit the bill almost to a T at that moment.
Yeah, I would have been the guy that left. Like, I'm thinking of another friend of mine right now, I was with him the last night of his drinking, but I was drunk and probably high with him, but I went home, and I know that he then went out with a bunch of other people and hit hardcore rock bottom, and his girlfriend at the time was like, you're going to rehab. And that was the last time I was there for that last night. So I probably would have been there. I would have been the first act of that last night for you.
Well, that would have been delightful. I'd have a story to tell about Ben Feldman saving my life.
He watched me puke in a cab.
And did nothing about it, and went home and slept it off while you looked inward.
I mentioned Mad Men, and I want to talk about that very specifically for this podcast. First of all, and I'm going to...
You're going to steal my question. I can feel it right now.
All right, well, I'll lead it off by embarrassing Ben by saying,
yes,
that was the time when I watched that show and I watched you and I go, holy shit, like I knew you were good, but that performance and that arc, I got a little chilly,
thanks, man.
Was so real and so grounded and so frenetic, and all these things at once without being forced, without being performative, Michael Ginsberg was such a troubled guy who had obvious mental illness. Was that something that the creator of the show, Matthew Weiner, knew was going to be the arc, or was it something that started out with just he's just a kind of a nebbish weird guy, and then it became a storyline? And if so, what sort of preparation did you do to represent that mental illness so accurately, so compassionately? That's a lot of questions.
That's a lot of questions, but I'll start off by saying thank you. It's very kind of you. I'll start with the first part. There's nothing Matt didn't think of.
Yeah.
So there's not a single thing on that show where he was like, I'm just going to do this. And oh, look, I turned into this. He knew. It was the attention to detail on that show, from character to aesthetic, it was astounding. With that particular character, they didn't like to, Matt specifically, didn't like to get in the weeds with actors too much. So a lot of it was done on my own, simply because I think they correctly think that a lot of times actors overthink stuff. And it's a subtle show. The show worked a lot of the time because it wasn't trying to telegraph, it wasn't parading around its ideology. And so if an actor came in and was like, well, what about my background and what's he going through? The general vibe was like, just say the words, it'll work out. And that even extended to, I remember I was talking to him, there's a scene, and I won't spoil it for anybody who still hasn't seen the show, but there's a scene where my character's referring to himself as an alien, but he's talking about being a part of a concentration camp. But in his mind, he's saying like, he was talking about how he was born an alien. And I remember talking to Matt and being like, how much do you want me to lean into this side versus this side? And he kind of let me talk. And then he goes, you're just an alien. Just do that. And I was like, and I was very frustrated at the time, but he was right to say that. Yeah. And I got literally from that scene got nominated for an Emmy. So he was correct. What I took from that and sort of a lot of that vibe, and especially playing a character like that, is you don't want to think too much about it, because somebody who is going through that, who is in that place, is not thinking about from a healthy person's perspective. They're thinking from their own perspective, which is just whatever's kind of happening in the moment. And if he believes that, they're being attacked by aliens and you need to put tinfoil on the windows, that's just play that. Yeah. Or else you're going to be playing something else. You're going to be commenting on your own character. And I learned a lot from that show about simplicity when it comes to an actor. Even my audition, one of the greatest notes I've ever gotten in my life from a director was in the audition. It was Matt Weiner. This is already my favorite show on TV when I auditioned, and the audition was for Matt Weiner and John Hamm, because John was directing my first episode, his first time directing too. So that's who's in the room, just me, John, and Matt. And I read it a million times, and I took this risk with the accent because they didn't ask for that. They said New York energy, which we all know what that means. I'm in there and I'm doing it, and Matt's got all these notes, and he's like, well, try this, and what about if you say this line, blah, blah, blah. And John didn't say anything. And finally, like 20 takes in, John just goes, what about just don't smile? And that's all he said. And suddenly everything clicked for that character. It's like, oh, I get it. This is my mom's friend, Margie, who says these kind of outlandish things, and she knows she's being wacky, but she's not doing it because she's being funny and she's not entertained by it. And she could tell a joke without laughing. And really she's pushy, blah, blah, blah. Like, I knew exactly who the character was just by John saying, don't smile. And so there's a lot of lessons like that I learned from that show. I know this isn't an acting podcast.
No. It's wherever it goes.
Yeah. You overthink a lot. And I think that show taught us to be you. And my lesson from that show is that Duck thinks too much and too hard. Matt Weiner's talked about it all the time.
You joke, but I will tell you this. I went in multiple times and I was in the room with Matt multiple times, and there hasn't been an audition in my life that was more supportive and more comforting. He was like, let's try it again. We're going to find something for you. We love you in here. They never found something for me. That's
such a frustrating.
But I didn't care. I literally, it's like, I think of that, and I think of like one other audition where I got a note from the casting director afterward that was like, you were great. You're not right for this, but you were great. Like, those two things stand out more than booking jobs. Yeah. So just a side note, that kindness goes a hell of a long way. Yeah. I do feel like that guy had it all. He had the entire picture in his head.
He did. And then that character specifically, what's so funny is people come up to me all the time and say...
And cut off their...
Actually, side note, great thing. Sorry, this is a spoiler, so fast forward or whatever. So often people come up to me and say, you're cut your ear off. And it really gives me hope for our society, us as a culture, because I'm like, no, you're confusing him with Van Gogh. Good for you. Right. That's so cool. But it was a nipple.
You're really culturally...
You're confused, but you know your art history.
So close.
Yeah. But no, people come up to me and they're like, God, that guy just went nuts out of nowhere. And I'm like, no, he didn't. No. You just were watching a lot of other storylines. If you just took his and put them together, early on, he was going nuts and sitting on the floor and wigging out and saying weird shit. People just weren't, took it for granted and thought he was being silly instead of thinking there's really a serious thing going on here, until a serious thing went on.
Yeah. I would assume that SuperStore is the culmination of I am no longer the understudy. I am no longer the young kid. I'm the veteran.
Yeah.
Was Mad Men a
Saved my
turning
life.
point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huge turning point. I had been on
Because you had done Drop Dead Diva
I
for
was
years.
on that show for a couple of years,
not
but it wasn't
widely seen.
No, and it's widely
With my
interestingly-
with my neighbor Lex Medlin.
Yes. Oh, that's your neighbor, Lexus?
Yeah, well, he
I love
was.
him.
He moved away. You miss you, Lex?
He's not dead.
No. Oh, he isn't? Sorry, I haven't talked to him in years. I hate that guy.
I was on that show. I wasn't super happy just in general. I wanted to be on something that I watched. Lots of people watch that show, weirdly. People come up to me all the time still to this day, knowing only that.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, I've done other things.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't my thing specifically. I loved all the people involved on that show so much. And that show saved me in a lot of ways too, because without that show, I was in kind of a darker place, I think. And that Lifetime show, Drop Dead Diva, I did it for a couple of years. And it kept me grounded, I think. When Mad Men happened, everything changes, because it's not just my friends that watch it or that I watch it. All the people that can give you jobs watch it, and all important, more people probably watch the show on Lifetime, but the people that watch this show own companies and wrote reviews, and I remember the first carpet I did for it. It was like around the Emmys, and I was doing an interview, and this woman interrupted the interview on the carpet and was like, "I'm so sorry to bother you. I just want to tell you I'm a giant fan." And I turned around, it was Amy Poehler.
Oh my
she
God.
just ran up, and I was like, holy shit! Like the people that watch it changed. So yeah. So with a show like SuperStore, I didn't have to audition for that show, which was like the coolest thing ever.
I want to ask you about that later.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is interesting to me just to hear the process, because the simplicity of what you talked about, just playing the reality of this person's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing to me as a therapist, somebody who studied psychology and knows what psychosis looks like, to see it played in that way, and to be so authentic and so true, and to realize like you don't even necessarily have to study it to know how to play it.
Yeah. You don't.
Did you have any reference point? Did you like meet people that were psychotic? Did you read anything about it?
No, I mean, I certainly, and people
He
talk to me
doesn't
all the time about it.
He doesn't do work.
No,
he doesn't
I
do
didn't even,
research.
I have no interest in doing anything. It's extracurricular that you're talking about. No, I did. I mean, I had a lot of conversations with people, and I've had conversations with, people in your field and whatever, but not as research, just sort of anecdotally, because I didn't want, there's a combination. He not just was somebody with mental problems, he was also the like Jewiest character on the show. Mm-hmm. And I never ever wanted him to be the mouthpiece of to represent a group of people, whether it's people with mental problems, or Jews. Mm-hmm. And I remember I did a lot of Jewish press. Jewish newspapers wanted to talk to me all the time. And I resented it because I was like, first of all, there was other Jews on the show. He was just the most obviously Jewish. But I was like, but he's not. And they would try and sort of ask about what he believes and how he sort of speaks to that generation of Jews. And I was like, he doesn't. He was just a person who was unique and individual. And so once you start to go too far into studying the things that are going on with the person, they become they become symbols rather than individuals.
Do you think that the writers and or director have to have a deeper understanding and sort of empathy because if you're too empathic about like what you're caring for this character, you're not playing the character, right? You're taking a sort of away from it a little bit. Mm-hmm. But the person who's writing this character, the person who's going to conceptualize and saying to you, just play it like this is your reality. Do they have to understand? I mean, how does...
Yes, especially those writers. Those are some of the greatest writers I have and ever will work with. And they put so much thought into so much of that show that I think a lot of that was just say the words was kind of them saying, we did
the work.
Yeah. Please
it's in there.
Stop. Yeah, your work might mess up our work.
Got it.
And we did a lot. So yeah, they put a lot of thought into it. And there's Matt thought a lot about, I mean, look, in a lot of ways, a quirky Jewish creative writer on the show, in a way, there's pieces of Matt that probably, I mean, that's Matt on, his show. Mm-hmm. So yeah, there was a lot of thought that went into it, and you just have to play it. A lot of times you have to play the darkest, deepest stuff at face value, or else you're commenting on it.
Yeah. Side question: your father ran an ad agency, did he not?
Both parents were. In fact, my mom was basically Peggy.
Yeah.
My mom was Lizzie Moss.
So did they offer any insight into that world? No,
not at all.
None. Okay. You were going to, but then your mom didn't show up.
My mom, she was supposed to call me and she never did.
Sorry.
No, okay. My mom loved that show. But it was also, she was probably at that point, and I didn't know it at the time, on her way towards Alzheimer's, which is what inevitably got her. So I don't think she was as clear when I was mentally when I was on that show. My dad loved it. I mean, it was but my dad is my dad. So it's like, now that you're on the show, it's gone downhill.
Sure.
By the way, which is what the cast used to say. Like they won every Emmy. And then the first season I joined, they didn't win the Emmy. So
you're like the Ted McGinley
I was the shark
of awards.
The Ted McGinley of awards. I love that guy.
Now, you were raised Jewish. You were pretty conservatively.
No, not conservative. Oh, okay. I mean, and a lot of that stuff gets from that Jewish press that I did on Mad Men. That gets misconstrued a lot.
Oh, interesting.
I was my mom. Technically, I'm not. My mom wasn't Jewish. Isn't. My mom was like a witch. My mom did like Wiccan, literally,
really?
And read tarot cards.
Okay.
My dad wanted to raise me Jewish, and so it was kind of his thing. So I went to Hebrew school, but I went late. I studied for a bar mitzvah, but I ended up not having one.
So you're not a man yet.
I'm not. I'm still.
One day
12 essentially.
Nice.
Yeah.
So then, was Mad Men? Was that the kind of like the moment you mentioned moments in your life when you were like, okay, well, this is it?
Yeah.
Was that that moment?
It was. Okay. It was, and it's gone. I mean, it's happened so many times. Like that happened, and then right after Mad Men. As soon as Mad Men ended, I did a show where I was the lead, like immediately. And then that show got canceled and then immediately went to SuperStore. But then after SuperStore, we ended, and it was also COVID, and then it was like the strike and all these other things happened. And I kept saying no to a million things right after SuperStore. Like, I'm in a place where I can finally say no to people who are asking. And then people stopped asking. and then
I'll say yes. Anything Ben doesn't want to do, throw it my way.
You guys are paying me for this podcast, right?
We'll talk about
it. Great. And so that was a very recent moment where I suddenly stopped getting offers. And then that combined with the strike and with sort of the general thing that's happened to Hollywood right now anywhere, where, all of my friends are depressed and nobody's working. And then another show. And then I thought I was never going to do anything creative again. First, it was like, now I'm going to have to say yes to a procedural or something that I've always said no to. Now a procedural won't even hire me. I can name 3 right now that I really wished I had gotten. And then this other show came along and saved me that will, I think, be in America early next year.
Population 11?
Yeah. Which saved me because I was an executive. Out of nowhere, this script just showed up. It was a show I loved. It was a lead doing all the things I wanted to do. And I was the executive producer. And it was in a far off land, and I was working with all these incredible people, and I was in charge of the show. It saved me entirely. And you sort of have this like gas tank in you. And my gas tank was just about fully empty, creatively and hope wise. And that show came along literally as the light was flashing on my dashboard. And now I could hear a bunch of no's for the next another year or so, 2 years, and I could just coast on how much that show saved me mentally.
Okay. Wow. Well, let's back up for a minute though, because SuperStore was a big deal. Like this was your thing that you were the face of.
You in America, who I've heard just a monster to work with.
Just a terrible, awful,
right?
awful. Well, it's as soon as she went full MAGA.
Oh yeah. That was weird. It was a weird choice, but I respect it.
Yeah. No, she's great. Everybody was great. Go on.
Well, you're one of the stars. You got to direct a couple episodes. You even became a producer for the last few seasons, right? What did that do for your ego?
Everything. Well, but by the end of SuperStore, I was a father of 2. I think a father of 2. Yeah, Effie was. Yeah. Anyway, who knows when my daughter was born? I had been through all of this. I was older. I was able to be grateful, and I remember driving to Universal all the time. I would stop and check in and be like, "Hey, look around! Like you've got a little lanyard that you swipe, and this gate, you just get to drive onto this lot, and you've got a parking space in the middle of Universal and a big trailer with like a bed in it, Like, and like you get to do this awesome show. You get to like talk to after the table reads, you get to stay and talk to the producers and the other.
This didn't work.
Yeah. You could complain and people have to listen to you about like plot points. But as soon as when I was producer on that show, I said, when I talked to Universal about it, I was like, I'm going to be a producer. This is not a thing where you just give me this title and it's like an actor. It's like a vanity thing. I was like, I'm going to work extra hard. I'm going to make sure that I'm reading, you know, all of the early drafts and the you know, the outlines before and give notes on everything and I'm going to try and get this actor and blah.
I was going to say, did you have casting input? Because I went in a lot for that show.
Weirdly.
And I didn't ever.
You know what's funny? I think I pitched you. B, I know I brought Dennis in.
Okay.
And had I seen you, I don't think.
I'm joking.
Did you? No, but
I did go in a few times for it.
When I was producer?
I don't know.
Because if I had seen you, it would have been flagged like crazy.
But honestly, I think about that whenever you have a friend who's on a show. We have some friends who are directors and things like that. And there's this double-edged sword of like, hey, they're going to get me in, but also you don't want to let them down. You don't want to like blow your wad on like a little crappy role when you're like, well, you could wait and bring me in for something bigger.
Yes.
It's a really tough thing as an actor to be like, this person's calling in a favor for me, but I don't want to A, blow that opportunity, or B, waste it on a small little role. You know what I mean?
Right.
So,
and conversely, that's, I mean, there was parts where because there was a lot of parts where I'd be like, oh, this would be right for someone. And then I'd be like, but they'd just be coming in and saying one joke and that's it for them. Yeah. And then the other side of that as a producer, you have a lot of friends that are out of work actors. And so say Duck is on, I know I have some deep, dark, insecure friends that are like, well, okay, cool.
I'm
Where
a
was
Duck
my,
type.
I've done that. You could think of some of them. We went
That's
to school
true.
with them.
I do know them. Yeah. Was that your first offer?
No, I'm trying to remember my first, there was offers I turned down. And then the first offer that I did, I think as a show, was the show before that. It was called
A to Z?
No, never mind. I had a chemistry read for A to Z with Chris and Maillard. That was maybe the first offer of a regular. It wasn't a guest spot that I ended up doing.
What did that feel like, that moment when you were like, I don't have to audition for this? You're just offering? I mean,
I was horrified. Well, here's what happened. I had just been I wasn't as impressed with myself as I would be now in retrospect, but I had just done a show for that network. Mm-hmm. I was the face of that. I was on billboards in Times Square. It was a sitcom on NBC. So at that point, it made sense to me that they would be like, well, this was our lead 5 seconds ago. We've got this show. He can be the lead here. And I knew America was already in. So I knew I wasn't like the special of the lead offers. Yeah. The other show had gotten canceled and it didn't go exactly the way I wanted. And like when I was offered this show, it was like reading, I've said this before, reading a delicious menu from a restaurant that just gave me food poisoning. Like I was like, NBC, just kind of screwed me. And I said to my agent, I don't want to be in a sitcom and I don't want to be on NBC. She's like, well, I got bad news for you. You're going to like this script. Yeah.
NBC's like, it's okay, baby. I love you.
Yeah. Come on.
I didn't mean it.
Take a bite. So that offer was complicated because I really, and to this day, one of the producers, Dave Bernard, who's now this prolific, I mean, he did White Lotus and Jury Duty and all these huge things. He always laughs about the email that he and the creator got from me. That was like a list of not demands, but I was like, I just want to make sure it's this show, not this show. And it's an ensemble, not this, and blah, 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 and all that. I was so paranoid that I was walking into something bad. I can't ever enjoy anything. Yeah. Only in retrospect.
Not that you can plan life out in this way, but right in the middle of the biggest thing that you've ever done, you mentioned you had your kids in that time frame.
Yeah.
How was that, managing having young kids?
Aren't they the worst?
They're cock blocks.
Ryan doesn't know how good he has it.
I know.
Exactly. It was great. It was the best timing because it was a stable job. And it's also, we were sort of like a bottle episode show. Like everything took place in a store on one of 2 stages, 12 minutes from my front door. We had a pretty consistent schedule. I was there in the morning. I was home usually by dinner. It was a great time to have a kid. Charlie was born on my 1 week hiatus. We would go 3 weeks on, 1 week off, 3 weeks on, 1 week. Charlie just chose like the second day of my hiatus to get. It was great. And they could come and hang out on set. We had little vests that we put on. It was adorable.
SuperStore vest.
So it was convenient. It was easy. Everything was perfect. And then it was just it's again, I knew it was good, but you never know. You never really think about how good something is when it's good. I now look back and since SuperStore, all of my jobs have been leaving my family to go to Australia for 3 months or
Right.
Vietnam, or I was just in New Orleans and Dublin a couple months ago for like the better part of the year, leaving my family. Like for a good portion of time with both Mad Men and SuperStore and even the show in the middle, I was just getting up, going to work down the street and then coming back to my family. It was the greatest time.
I've talked about that, how the trend in our business is for 15 years, I worked in LA. Now I'm
Everywhere.
traveling everywhere except LA.
There may be those tax breaks may help
Yeah,
a little
we'll
bit, I'm
see.
hoping, but this isn't a local politics podcast. Get into that
Surprise.
later. You do
We've got
one of those though,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's the next
okay,
thing
great.
we're doing. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned like wanting to be grateful, wanting to take every moment and be grateful for
Mm-hmm.
what you were experiencing in that on that show. Did having kids that humble you? Did it give
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
I mean, yes, kids find a way to humble you. Charlie told me last night that I don't have any friends. And like my wife agreed with him. I do. I swear to God, I have friends. Kids humble you in many, many ways, but I think, and you're a parent too?
I'm not.
No, you're not.
No.
Okay.
No.
So one of the things, the main thing, my takeaway for me that I get from kids is an ability to understand how fast things move and to try and slow them down as much as possible and appreciate what's happening in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
When you have kids, sorry, I just have to print something out. Real quick. I'm printing up pictures.
It's a PDF.
Yeah, this is a PDF of my kids. I wanted to, this is a visual podcast.
I have a haunted printer. For those of you who aren't aware.
Is that a ransom note?
These guys are so sick.
People, first of all, when you have kids, everybody else with older kids are constantly going, it happens that fast. It's the most boring thing in the world, but they're right. And we see it happening. I see my kids feel like they're 37 compared to how they were 6 months ago.
Yeah.
So, and that carries on into the rest of your life. You go, none of this is going to like everything. I look around and I go, well, we've got money for dinner tonight and the weather's nice. I'm going to stop and appreciate this right now.
And is your partner, Michelle, does she have that same
Miserable.
mindset?
No, she hates the kids. She hates me. She does. And we're constantly kind of reminding each other how lucky we are all the time. Even when we're having awful weeks and everything feels like it's going wrong, we have the ability to step out of it and go eagle eye, zoomed out.
It could be a hell of a lot worse.
Yeah. There's so many people. What are we really complaining about? It could be so much worse. So yeah, I think kids teach you that a lot. And to appreciate everything that you have.
It seems like perspective seems to be a good catch-all word for just this conversation, in terms of your change in perception of yourself, of the world, of your career.
Yeah.
It's constantly changing and constantly reminding yourself to take a step back.
And I think
be grateful.
I think I'm happier now. I'm always mad that I'm old or that I feel old. But I'm not really. Like, it's like funny. I'm like, Joe, I'm so old,
right.
joke. Because I'm so much happier now than I was when I was 23 or 26 or whatever. The coolest age, the most fun age. I think for a lot of people, I don't know about you guys, probably you guys, which I could tell, I'm just assuming based on how you dealt with it, is the most insecure, hardest. Everything is terrible, even though it isn't time in your life. And now I have so many more real life problems, but I'm so much happier.
Yeah. It's the great dichotomy of, when you're 23, you have the least amount of responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
You can live on $100 a month,
And it's like romantic.
Right.
too.
And yet now when you're like, if I had to live in that way, I'd be a ball of stress.
Oh
but,
my God.
So yeah, it is sort of the yin and yang of
I mean,
getting
I had a futon. Like that alone would send me spiraling.
Yeah.
I think I
days.
had a delayed 20s insecure period because
Yeah.
when I was 23, I was making
Yeah,
songs
you were in
about
one of the
I was on
biggest
my
rock
second-
band in the world.
My second
Yeah,
record
that was
deal.
you had a different trajectory.
Yeah. But then I left that, and then I had realized I didn't deal with all the stuff that people usually have to go through in their early 20s. And then it was like all
You
of a
make
sudden,
up for it. You catch it.
Yeah.
You're gonna get that.
Everyone has to go through it at some point,
Yeah.
even if it's when you're 40.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
now here you are. You're at this point in your life where tell us more about this project. You said it's called Population 11.
Yeah, so that's weirder to talk about because I don't know when it's gonna.
Oh, okay.
It exists in Australia. We were nominated for like their Emmy. We just got nominated for this other international award like a couple days ago. But God forbid we sell. It's impossible to sell anything in the States. I think we've got something and it's going to air here soon on a streamer. But it was the greatest thing ever. It was in the middle of the outback. I mean, I was in Northwest Australia. And when you talk to Australians, they're like, mate, that's
Don't
not,
go to
that's
Northwest
not
Australia.
Yeah, we've never been there. Like when we got there, I was like, why are you guys so excited about crocodiles? Don't you have them in your yards? I was like, mate, we live in Sydney.
Yeah.
This was like, there was like no stop sign. I ate at a BP gas station like most nights of the week. All the animals are homicidal. It was just bleak, but it was an incredible show. And it was tremendously, it was like a murder mystery, comedy, relationship, weird, quirky character study, like all of the things you want. There's like action and guns, but like serious moments and funny moments. It was really, really, really cool. And it just made me rekindle everything that was sort of like an artist in that time when I was pretty tapped out. So there was that. And then I did this other show that is coming out in January however.
It's coming out now.
It just came out a week ago. This witch show called Mayfair Witches that I did. That was cool because I get to go to, I went to New Orleans and I went to Dublin and whatever. So that was really fun too. So now I feel like I'm doing stuff and I'm like, I'm in the up part. I'm sure something's going to knock me down soon.
So what are your ambitions moving forward? Do you just want to act as long as you can, or is directing and producing as important?
I directed on that show and would again, but I wouldn't direct someone else's thing. Like I wanted to learn about it more than I wanted to become a director. I think it's important in any industry to learn about the other side of whatever your job is, so that you can also see your job from a different perspective. So I learned a lot directing. Trying to build something from the ground up is just such a cool, in the arts in general, it's crazy that you can take nothing and build something and then make money off of that thing and be happy doing it. Out of thin air, out of just an idea that you had in the shower is a crazy thing. I think that's one of the best things about being an artist. You don't need tools. So that's what I want to do, build something, if it's more a specific enough answer for you.
Absolutely.
It's one of the things that I at least enjoy about this project is that it's something we've built from the ground up, and it fulfills me so spiritually, artistically. It's like we're creating something out of whole cloth.
Completely. You're just like, hey, great. You have a brain, I have a brain. What if we make something that's a real thing?
And I get to do it with a buddy and see friends and talk to meet new people and learn new things. It's great. So I recommend it. Start a podcast.
No one's suggested that before.
We're the first ones, I think.
Is this? I haven't heard of podcasts.
Or just join ours.
You can get third chair, third mic.
I do like asking questions. That's a new thing. I didn't, in my old narcissistic days, I never asked. And now I've learned to like asking questions.
Do you have any questions for us?
No, I'm completely uninterested in you guys.
All right, well, Ben, this has been it's been a great conversation. This has been awesome, man.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me. This is super fun. Do we play something? There's a lot of instruments here.
Now we get there. We do a little ragtime number.
It's ragtime.
I got a clarinet back here.
I didn't mean ragtime like the musical, or are we doing like something racially charged?
Your choice.
Okay, great. Yeah,
man. Well, thank you so much for your time. We've covered a lot in a relatively short period of time, and right on point in terms of the tone and everything that we like to do on the show. So
awesome.
Thank you for being open and just.
So it probably won't get scrapped. We'll probably use it.
Great. Awesome. Yeah. You're going to cut out all the really offensive stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't believe you knew some of those words.
The super sexist things.
The Yiddish was a little difficult to parse.
I did do about 10 minutes solely in Yiddish.
But it was really funny. It was Boris Belt stuff. Yeah.
So Ben Feldman, the most self-aware narcissist in the world, has been our guest on this episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. Join us every Tuesday for new episodes when they drop. Anything you want to share before we go out, Doug?
No. I'm just glad you finally got some self-awareness.
Thanks, man.
Took you long enough.
Any last words?
Glad to not offend.
I actually do want to say this is our first episode of our new season, and we thank all of our listeners and viewers for coming along with us. And we're happy to have Ben as our first guest this year.
I talk so much, guys.
That's the point.
Next episode is about you.
It's an audio
I want to hear about you.
Oral medium. Anyway, thanks for being a part of it, and we look forward to exciting things this season. So stay tuned.
So join us next week for another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. Thanks a lot.